What's up? Welcome to the Confluence VC podcast. This podcast is meant to give you a personal glimpse into the next era of investors and operators. This week we had on Sutian, who's the co-founder of Women in VC. Women in VC is the world's largest network for women working in venture capital, and since its founding in 2015, the group has grown to nearly 3,000 members today. Sutian has been one of our earliest supporters, and she's given us tons of priceless knowledge on building and scaling communities. In this talk, we cover Sutian's path into venture and the spark that led to the formation of Women in VC, the challenges of scaling a community from niche to global, statistics and findings from the Women in VC Emerging Manager Report, and tactical advice for the Confluence community on how to best support investment into women-led businesses.
Everyone, we want to give a huge warm welcome to Sutian, an amazing community member within the VC ecosystem who's led a variety of different initiatives that I can't even go into detail in this intro, but from the Women in VC to her own fund structures that she's been like a huge part of as a partner, to now just being a mentor to so many folks and just running it up in numerous other ways. I'm very happy to give her a warm welcome to this episode and dive into what she's been working on. Also, it's really early. I'm sorry, everybody. Super early. I came from the East Coast, so I'm in LA and getting used to waking up this early for these dope podcasts. Anyway, Sutian, would you please give us a brief introduction of your story? Because I don't want to butcher. You've done so much dope stuff.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to be here and thanks for having me. I too am in LA, but I'm trying really hard to stick to East Coast time and be up. It feels good to be up at 5 and be like, yeah, I'm the first one up for the first time ever and try to stick to that schedule. But anywho, excited to be here.
This is the earliest
exactly.
podcast.
You know what? It gets you up, gets you moving. I don't have complaints there. But yeah, in either case, happy to be here. We're, I guess, both technically in the same city, though. LA's a big spot. And as Tyler mentioned, pretty involved with a number of things in the VC community. So I guess my quick background, I was born in China, raised in Texas, went to NYU for my undergrad, and then worked in fintech after as my first job out of school. And after that, did a little bit of a 180 and moved into fashion, was head of marketing for a fashion house here in New York, and then joined VC, which is a little bit of a weird transition through a number of industries and a number of jobs. And I had started my VC career at a shop in New York called Firstmark Capital. Firstmark was one of the leading venture firms in New York. It was great to be there and was there from right after they had spun out the fund out of Pequot Ventures to about 2015. Doing mostly consumer investing, mostly Series A investing, but ended up as Firstmark grew, doing a little bit of everything as we started to cover some seed and then some growth. And then when I was there, I had noticed that there were more and more female founders coming through my door. And probably as an abstraction of that, there were more and more folks who were understanding that the world was being consumed by technology and software and the internet, and who were wanting to take that insight to innovate in their respective fields. I'd noticed that female founders specifically were coming to me trying to raise seed rounds, which largely weren't a fit, and that there was a clear and really big opportunity to create a fund dedicated to investing in the next generation of exceptional female talent. And so I had met my former partner anew at Female Founders Fund back, I guess it's late 14 or early 15, and joined the investment committee there for the first fund as we got to know each other, and then joined as the second partner ahead of us going out to market for our second fund. So the Female Founders Fund, quick story, is that it's one of the best known early stage funds investing in female founders, and has made a number of pretty interesting investments from Zola to Tala to Billy to Maven Clinic. And the thing that I saw when I was there was a flip of what I was seeing female founders go through when I was at Firstmark. And this was that when we as female fund managers were going out to market to raise our capital, it was correspondingly hard to raise. So fundraising, as just an objective statement, is hard. Right? It doesn't matter if you're a founder or a funder, but raising money and convincing people to take a bet on you is hard. But I noticed that as female fund managers and as emerging fund managers and as small fund managers and as seed-focused fund managers, all of those things made it harder for us to do the work that we had to do, raise money to do the work that we really wanted to do, which is invest in companies and support founders. And it became, I'm going to begin a little opaque here, but it became really clear to me that there was an opportunity to put a stake in the ground, similar to how First Mark had put a stake in the ground in New York, how Female Founders Fund had put a stake in the ground for female founders, to put a stake in the ground and claim ownership of a really quickly growing market of emerging fund managers, and find ways to invest in and support those fund managers, but also invest in and support the high growth companies that they back. And so that's the thesis behind some of the stuff that I'm working on now, which is a new fund that will hopefully be announced before end of year, but who knows with some of the news cycles right now. And so aside from that, I guess I've also, and the reason why I think, Clay, you and I have first connected was back in 2015 when I was still at First Mark. Actually, I had started what is now the largest community of female investors in the world, the Women in VC community. And we've grown that from, I think, maybe 15 people in New York in our first meeting in 2015 to 2,900. Yeah, it was 2,700. It grows quickly, which means I have to pause every single time to be like, what's the latest number? It's 2,900. We'll probably pass 3,000 by the end of the year, which is pretty awesome.
That makes you
a lot of people in the community now.
That makes you the largest VC community in the country, if not the world, I believe. Like, I would assume, like, we studied a lot of communities.
I think so. Sorry, you just broke up. Say that again.
I was saying we've studied most of the communities, and like you're like the elephant in the room. Like, I'm pretty certain that you all are the biggest actual VC community. So congrats. Can you tell us a bit about the challenges needed for you to really just get there? Like, what were some of the pivot points and turning points, or like key champions? I know for us, there are like a few people who shared it within their community and turned around like 200, 300 new people for us out of nowhere, which created the viral growth cycle for Confluence. Like, how has that been for you over the years? Like, what was the growth story here?
Yeah, so I would say, firstly, we are certainly not a viral product. The community, we do not have a virality, right? Though the community has grown quickly, and it's really beyond what we thought the size it would be over the last few years. I'd say from the start, Jess and I my co-founder here, never, how would I say this, when we started it, our goal wasn't to create the biggest community of investors in the world. We were truly trying to scratch our own itch. Yeah, when I'd started my career in VC, there had always been these starts and stops of VCs getting together, of younger VCs, of female VCs, of VCs that invest in consumer, that invest in enterprise, so on and so forth. But there was never, for a number of reasons probably, there was not a whole lot of permanence in those communities. Like, they would start, and then somebody would go to business school, and then they would stop. And so when Jess and I had met back in 2014, she had asked me this question around why there's no community for women. I was like, it's a really good question. There's just not one right now. And so when we decided to create it, it was very much to say, oh, this would be valuable to us. I bet since we are one of 15 women in the community, it's probably valuable to other people as well. And so what we did, we started it just pretty casually. And I think that sentiment has really carried through the community, where there's a real sense of community ownership, right? That this is a grassroots effort, that this isn't anything that's top down and prescriptive, that this is something that is for the community, by the community, serves the community, right? And thus needs to be supported and grown by the community. And so I think a lot of those sort of cultural mores that have been integrated into the community pretty organically have served us well, in that now we have enough sort of gravity that people join because that's the place where you can immediately plug in. But it's grown because I think the folks in our community have found a lot of value, and whether it's professional or true friendships or, new deals or new jobs. And so it leads us to have a pretty high, we've never measured this, but I think a pretty high NPS score and a pretty high referral rate.
What would you say were some of the challenges? And I would also, after that, love to dig into like how you all help facilitate the value props, right? Like we think about, you were just giving us game on donut, right? We're like, okay, well, like how exactly do you make sure that people are meeting the right people and building genuine things based on set interests? These are really hard things to figure out. It's like being a product person. In VCs, for you, you came from the startup world. But for us, it's a new thing for us to build something for people.
Yeah, gosh. Okay. So the way that we grew, again, it was, I'd love to say that it was super strategic, the way that we grew, and we had this big 10-year vision and blah, 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 but that's certainly not the case. We started the community to scratch an itch. We grew the community and started standing up different. So for some context, the Women in VC community started as a bi-monthly dinner in New York, right?
Oh, okay. That's okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the first one was in February of 2015. We invited all the women we knew in venture, which was about 15 women. And I remember being pretty excited by that number. Actually, I was like, geez, like it's more than I can count on my hands. That's a lot. And so
I totally understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. You're like, cool. Like it's more than I expected. It's not a lot. It's not a lot in absolute numbers. I'm not going to be mad at the number. But so we started super casually. We went to a bar. We said, okay, let's have drinks at a bar at a rooftop, like hotel bar in New York. And I think we actually crashed like a museum party or a magazine party or something. It was somebody else's event. And we were all dressed in a way that was acceptable to them to have us come in. It was very random, so to speak. But over time, as we were doing these bi-monthly events, the thinking just sort of evolves organically, right? From the central premise of what does the community need and what would serve it best. We said, wouldn't it be cool if we had directories? So now people know each other, they've met each other, but maybe they don't have each other's information. They forget, oh, who's that woman who said she invested in blockchain? I don't remember who that person is. And so we created a directory. And then over time, as it became, and honestly, we created that directory because Jess and I needed a place we didn't want to recreate the invite list every single time. And so we created this directory. And then over time, we're like, oh, it'd be cool to have people just submit their own information into the directory because then we don't have to do it. And thus, there's a form for the directory inputs. And then over time, we said, oh, wouldn't it be cool if people could interface with each other outside of the bi-monthly dinners. And I think we had tried a Google group at some point, but the group had gotten big enough at that point where it made sense to thread. It made sense to spread communications and have it go off platform, so to speak, off email. And so we said, okay, well, Slack was pretty nascent at that point. And we're like, yeah, we should just set up a Slack, see what happens. And then at some point we expanded the directory because Jess and I were going to SF pretty frequently at that point. We said, oh, we should add the SF women in here. And then it became national. And then over time, we're like, man, there's people in London. We should add them too that way. Right? There was not like a super, again, not a super strategic thought process. And then with the Slack group really exploding, it was a very New York centric Slack for a long time. And until we released the first ever State of the Union for women in VC, the report on how many women there are, what they invest in, where they live, etc. When we released that, we're like, why is our Slack only New York? Wouldn't it be so cool if everyone in the community could talk to each other? And then now you get to where we are now, which is thankfully, the thing that I'm most happy to see is that even as the community has grown, thankfully we've retained that sense of ownership for everyone in it.
So that's actually that's a really big point, right? Like Clay and I are constantly thinking about engagement, authenticity, and just making people feel a sense of ownership or need to check back in. And what's really dope about women in VC is the women who I know who are part of the community, they're always like, yo, if you want, I can post in women in VC if you want. It's always this sense of their tool, their platform. The amount of use that they get out of that is incredible. So thank you for naturally falling into creating one of the dopest platforms there are.
I appreciate that. Good to hear.
So one thing that I do want to note is that because this thing has been so helpful and because so many people have joined, and it's been a while now, you actually have a lot of the most influential, top performing, etc., managers and community members in the world on your platform. And I also saw, and Clay pointed this out, that you all put out a list of emerging managers. Do you want to talk about that? how it came about, what are some of the numbers around it maybe, or even highlight some people who you're just proud of. And I'm sure they're your friends. They're
Yeah.
always hyping you up.
No. So again, this is some organic thinking, right? The quick backstory is that Jess and I are both starting, pretty different, but our respective new funds. And over the years, we had been tracking the types of women who are coming into the community and joining. And anecdotally, over the years, we had seen more and more women joining who were founders of their own funds. We're like, oh, this is really interesting, right? Like, I wonder how many people in the community have founded their own funds versus joined new funds. And it seems to be aligned with some of the broader trends we're seeing in the venture community, which namely is an explosion of the number of micro and nano VC funds there are, right? And the number of emerging managers that have come to market. So we had this, feeling that there was going to be interesting data to be pulled from there. And we said we should do a report on this, because if we think about venture as really a vehicle for investing in innovation and in future growth, well, who are the people going to look like in the future? And what does that mean for our community? And so the Women in VC Emerging Manager Report, which will be, knock on wood, an annual thing that we re-release, is available on our website, women-vc.com. And it is a fairly comprehensive report that goes through, again, like the state of the union of female emerging managers, both, female emerging managers, but it goes through data around female partners, female founding partners, and firms that are female founded, which I know those last two can sound similar, but they're functionally, one is that we're looking at funds, and then one is that we're looking at individuals. But the high level insights that we knew, but were really good to get numbers behind, is that out of all the female partners in our ecosystem, which I think we have a fairly statistically, significant sample set here, almost half of them are founding GPs of their own funds, right? And out of all the emerging managers, or all the women who are founding GPs, there are, I think, like 72% of them are emerging managers. Like, they've started their funds within the last 5 years, which is incredible. And these women, again, tracking with the rest of women in VC generally, invest across all areas, but many of them have founded or fundraising for firms like ones and twos, which means that they're in this really, really pivotal place of their fund's life, where they don't necessarily have a super solid capital base yet, where they can just raise no problem. And so their like economic dislocation and exogenous events that are happening in the world can be both positively and negatively impactful to their fundraise. And the other really pivotal part of that is that data has shown and history has shown that most managers do their best when they're early and they're really hungry and they're really looking for deals. And so our report hopefully drives home the conclusion for folks, right? That in order to change the ultimate demographics of who starts companies, who gets to work at technology companies, what types of technologies these companies create, what industries they innovate in, we have to change the who of who invests the capital as well.
That is so spot on.
And so that's the part. Tyler, you're Black. I'm an Asian woman. I would say Asians are fairly well represented, very represented in venture.
When you're talking of the groups of oppressed people, Asian women are like a little bit better represented.
Right.
Is that the same thing is happening across African American investors in general? There's this whole concept of these white men are never going to make me partner. Even if they would, right? What would have to happen, how much I'd have to adapt myself to how they live life to get them to trust me. And their light is just too much when there's an abundance of capital. For years, people who have been qualified, typically less than me, given the how much harder it is for people who are women or of color to break into it. They're just like, you know what, screw it. I'm gonna go try my own thing and maintain ownership.
Right.
That's why you see, if you look proportionally, I would assume that there's a higher percentage of people of color and women who are running their own shops than there are of white men. I don't know this.
That's right. In our data, I can tell you, out of all of the founding GPs or partners, about, I think 34%, about a third of them are non-white. And this is versus 20% of all partners in the US. So within a diverse base already, just women, you have more diversity within that. That being said, though, I think the VC industry still falls very behind on thinking about racial inclusion and racial diversity. From our data set, I think it's either 10 or 30 basis points of all VC partners in the US are Black women. So it's like 0.3%. 0.3% of everyone in the US who's a VC partner is a Black woman. And so that's a de minimis number. And so when you look at those numbers, those are certainly areas where we collectively as an industry can think about, okay, how do we change like this outcome for the future? And to your point, Tyler, around people starting their own funds, I think that's something that I didn't touch on, but I think it's a super smart thing to talk about, which is that is one of the pivotal differences between where we are now and where we were 10 years ago, where people now have different paths that they can choose from. It's not just, okay, if I want to stay in VC, I'm conscripted to this path and I have to climb this specific ladder, even though it's certainly not a ladder that's designed for me. Now people have choice, right? And they have examples of other partners and other firms that have gone out and who look like them and who have done well. And so they're like, oh yeah, like 645 just raised that $160 million fund. Like it's possible to do that and I can do that. And that for a lot of people, being able to write your own destiny and be an entrepreneur in many senses of the word is a lot more attractive of a career path to bet on. Yeah. So I think it'll be really interesting to watch how this continues to evolve over the next 10 years.
You know, my thesis is that a lot of these funds will emerge as top performers. Like, at least in my community, you have so many folks who are the pioneers, right? Like you think of someone like Aaron and Namdi at 645, or you think of Charles at Precursor, or you think of Monique from 500 who's doing her own thing now and getting things set up, or I can keep going. I think as more and more of those people start to spin out, we'll see their friends and founders they've backed, or people who are just coming from adjacent spaces who are elite, just doing it more and more. And the fact of the matter is VCs are startups. Some fail, some don't, but you'll start to see some of those things scale. And as those things scale, like you'll start to see more and more folks in powerful position who are further inspired. It's the exact same way that the broader VC landscape evolved. With that, I would love to wrap this up. What are some of your thoughts on how we can continue to make these types of changes at scale? I think having these communities where people have a platform is great. I think continuing to put out this data to show that there's a difference that you've been doing, like proving to people that they can, like many others, continue to support this upward trend are ways. What are some of the ways that you're thinking about it? I know you've already done it with what you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So this is going to be a short answer, but I think it's the right answer. The most expedient way to make change within this industry is to write the check. And I will say this, write the check not just to diverse founders and underestimated founders, but write the check to underestimated funders, underestimated funds and fund managers who can take that capital and do some really interesting, unprecedented things with it and create change at a scale that hasn't existed in the past. And so I think that's the most important thing, right? What ways that we can make change? Well, it's by putting more money to work and putting money to work in the places that we didn't have money going before.
Totally agree. At the end of the day, it's earmarking capital is really awesome. And I'm really happy that's happened over the last year, a ton for diverse groups of people. But like just giving people the autonomy to make the decisions without bias and really just to have the freedom that being a capital manager creates and letting that happen at scale is the only real way. Everything else is just a piecemeal solution to me, just talk. So thank you for highlighting that. And also I want to highlight people like you all and people like Andre Hoffman, who's done that for a lot of people in the African American community through like Culture Shipping Weekend, along with Denmark West and all the other participants. I would love to really quickly hear if there's any ways or people who you wanted to highlight before we go into the quick round with Clay, who may be helping out on that front.
Yeah. I think that the first person is my co-founder and woman in VC, Jessica Peltz. And she's the founder of a new firm called Hannah Gray. And she was previously the head of venture at MVC, which is a corporate VC firm based in New York. And we've been doing this together since day one. And so I think she's been a really important voice for change. And the other folks that I think are doing really important work as well are like Eileen and Pam at Always, who have done some really pioneering things with both founders and funders. Soraya Dorabi at Transact, who's focused on emerging female managers or founding female managers. And that's been a really valuable source of information as well. And this is like an answer, but the thing that I do see is that there are so many emerging managers who are probably less resourced, right, on a relative basis than established firms that are so generous with their time. And this isn't the reason why I'm not calling anyone out specifically is because it's not an isolated incident of one person being super generous and helpful. Everyone is trying to help everyone else succeed. And I think that's a really different paradigm than the one in traditional VC that I've encountered. And it's important for me to note that because VC, at the end of the day, we are competing for the best deals. We are competing to get into the best companies. We are competing for LP dollars. But the way that we've approached I've seen folks approach growing the market is by focusing on growing the pie, not necessarily saying, I want to get all of the pie. And that has been awesome because people have been individually, quietly helpful to each other in a way that's made I think a huge difference to how people have gotten into business as new fund managers.
Agree. Yeah, I think there's always like a few key catalyst makers who become legends over time for really changing not only our community but the world because of the impact that it has. So shout out to all those people. We'll definitely tag them in the post. Thank you for letting us know that, and hopefully we can direct as many people's eyes to them as possible. For one, being helped, and two, giving them just credit for that. Clay, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, let's do it. So Sutian, at the end of this, we just do these quick questions meant to be answered in 2 sentences or less. So first one we had specifically within the context of your role, what's a recommendation that you hear regularly that you think is bad advice?
What is a recommendation that I hear regularly that is bad advice? I'm trying to think. I'm like, what's the best bad advice that I've heard before? Okay, so the thing that comes to mind is I have heard, how do I say this? I think going to a ton of networking events and saying, hey, you need to go to networking events to build your network. I think doing that without a clear sort of set of goals in mind is oftentimes diminishing returns. So I'm not saying that all networking events are bad, but as a new VC, going to all the networking events that you can is not the most efficient use of time. And I have done that. So I would not suggest that for folks in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think Tyler's way better about it than I am with networking with people. Like I hated that part of the job before COVID hit and ironically started a community/networking tool.
I think you're right in the sense that most people go into it without understanding what is required to manage the volume of relationships. I think that's something that I have historically struggled with. I think I know mostly the people who I want to know, and I'm getting better at it. But if people just in the industry, per your advice, are going to do this, they need to have at least an Excel sheet or an Airtable or some type of database where they're tracking who they're meeting, what they mean, like what information there is, and then they can start to collect that data so they can better improve it. I think you're in on a really, really good point of people just like shooting in the dark.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So next one we had is in the last year, what new belief, behavior, habit has most improved your life?
In the last year has been crazy, huh? Gosh, what has I will answer this in two parts. One is towards the beginning of next year, I was like, wow, this Zoom thing is really going to improve my life. I no longer have to travel. I can get on Zoom and do the same thing over so that was the beginning of the year. In the latter half of the year, I was like, oh, limiting my Zoom is really improving my life, because I think I've seen this happen with other folks as well, where we leaned in really hard and we're all very gung-ho about doing Zoom meetings all the time. And I think similar to doing real life meetings, there's a time and place for everything, but not becoming Zoom exhausted or Zoom overwhelmed or just out-Zoomed, right, on video all the time, I think is also really important. It takes balance. We're in this new way of doing work, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to be on video all the time.
Yeah. Zoom fatigue is
it's
real.
like it's almost like the phone call has just disappeared. I've even moved to sending people just voice memos on iMessage, and even on LinkedIn sending people voice memos.
Yeah. I have not done that, but that's really interesting.
Yo, check it out. It's so beautiful that they added voice to LinkedIn.
That's interesting. I did not know.
All right, next one we had. So aside from having to say no all the time, what's the worst part about venture, in your perspective?
From a manager and a sort of fund manager point of view, it's certainly fundraising. Right? I think fundraising is really inefficient, and for all the things and all the resources that exist for founders to find their quote unquote right fit of investor, which are imperfect for sure, but at least there's tools and resources. There is not anything analogous that exists yet for emerging fund managers.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, next one we had. So a lot of this audience kind of skews to the analyst associate range. What's your best piece of advice for junior VCs or those aspiring to break into venture?
I wouldn't say break into venture. I more so say just kill it in venture.
Yeah.
Two things, and I know you said these were supposed to be two sentences, and I don't know if I said two sentences for any of these questions, but two things. One, seeking mentorship and asking for help is probably the most important thing. I spent my first year in venture feeling like I was swimming in the dark, being like, oh, I don't know where shore is. I'm just going to go for one direction and hope for the best. And I think it is a way to learn, but it's inefficient. And so having resources like Confluence, having resources like the Analyst Associate Channel and Women in VC, those are really important ways to get up the learning curve faster and understand the nuts and bolts of your job, so that you can focus on finessing and improving the softer skills that take longer and the network access that takes a longer time to grow. And then the second thing, and this is more of a broad piece of advice versus specifically for a junior people in VC, but I always like to think about the construct of saying no and asking, okay, what does it take to change a no because answer into a yes if answer? And so what I mean by yes if is, I think there are a certain set of constructs with which we will do the thing that is asked of us. And so instead of saying, no, I can't do this because, say, yes, I can do this if X, Y, and Z. And those things may sound like really ridiculous when you say them, right? Yes, I can do it if you fly, if my job, you want me to take this job in San Francisco or do this thing? Okay, yes, I can do it if you fly me private every week to go to San Francisco and fly me back by Friday. And it's a ridiculous ask, of course. But my point is that you just never know. And you give somebody a way to solve the problem. And if they say, hey, I don't want to fly you private every week, great, that's fine. But I'm telling you the ways in which I will do this. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by how often times people are willing to be creative and work with you there.
I think you might have just changed my life.
Let me know on your private flight.
Okay. One of the coolest things someone said on this podcast today. That just resonated really well.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
All right, last question we have here. So who is a mentor that you want to give credit to? I feel like you've already given us kind of a list of names, but is there any one or two people in particular that you want to shout out?
The guy who's been most influential to me in my venture career is the guy who hired me at Firstmark, Lawrence Lenahan, and he's been a tremendous friend and mentor to me over the last, 10 plus years that I've known him now. And he was the founder of Pequot Ventures and one of the founders of Firstmark, which was a spin out of Pequot. And he's just awesome. And I have a lot of superlatives to say about him, but I think he has been consistently a great resource, sounding board, supporter, and to find that within the firm I was at, just because venture firms are so small, right? Within the firm I was at, when I had first entered venture and started going down that path as a career, that's always going to be really special.
That's awesome. Cool. That wraps out the quick questions, all the questions we had in general, unless Tyler, you had any last minute ones you want to squeeze in.
The last questions that we always ask, since this is for us by us in the same nature as Women in VC, who would you like to see on this podcast?
Who would I like to see? I would like to see, again, I'm great at giving these non-answers to your answers. I would love to see more female founding partners, and specifically female founding partners of color on your podcast. Tyler, I think you mentioned something around like representation and how it matters. And I think that's so true. And I think I'm pretty great, but I'm an Asian woman and we're not uncommon, right, in this space. And so seeing more Black partners, seeing more Black women partners, seeing more Latinx women partners, seeing more LGBTQ plus women partners, seeing the spectrum of what a VC can look like, I think will be, and importantly, the different paths that one can take to be in VC and to succeed in VC. Those are the types of folks I'd be excited to hear more from.
So as of now, we've done 6 of 9 well, now with you included, not 6 of 9, but 7 of 10. 7 of 10 of the people on the podcast have been women, but we have not, other than yourself, had any female partner or women partners. And everyone's been a male. One sec, I'm sorry, I'm having someone coming downstairs.
No worries.
What's up? But thank you. But yeah, so we actually do need to have way more women GPs on this podcast. Like I have a few friends who are killers in raising amazing funds. But if you have any, please send us an email or shout them out now, and then we'll make that happen.
You and I will have to connect offline about this. There are a lot. So maybe too many to shout out in one email.
List, honestly, would be amazing.
There you go. Happy to help.
I guess we could technically just pull from your GP list. But anyway, yeah, thank you for that. And we're on the same page. I think that is what's needed. And I think we're going to continue for our podcast to make sure that we have the proper amount of representation. Maybe even over allocated. Towards like maybe we'll just do 12% or what is it like less than 20% of VC is like diverse. Maybe we'll just do that for our podcast. Like less than 20% of ours will be white men. Thank you so much. I don't have any more questions other than like how we can be helpful to you down the line. We can follow up offline on that.
Yeah, thank you too for having me on. It was a real pleasure to chat, and I'm so thrilled to be a supporter of Confluence and everything that you two have been building there. Consider me a resource for any and all future endeavors.
Love it. Again, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a great Thanksgiving. Well, we can, again, I meant what I said, happy to be a resource. So let me know how I can be helpful to you too.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Well, have a good one.
You too.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
I want to thank Sutian again for coming on and continuing to be a resource for us. Tyler and I both learned a ton from this talk. We hope that each of you are able to pick up something valuable from it. If you're interested in learning more about some of the statistics we're referencing, we've attached the Women in VC Emerging Manager Report in the description below.
For next steps, if you're an investor and have not already signed up to join, we encourage you to check out our website at www.confluence.vc to submit your info to become a member. If you have any feedback for us, please feel free to reach out directly either to Tyler at gpv.com or myself at clay@bunkercapital.com. Hope to hear from you all soon.